And now the ancient witness for this morning comes from John, verses 5 through 30. He came into a Samaritan village, to a town called Sychar, that bordered the field Jacob had given his son Joseph. Jacob's well was still there. Jesus, worn out by the trip, sat down at the well. It was noon. A woman, a Samaritan, came to draw water. Jesus said, "Would you give me a drink of water?" His disciples had gone to the village to buy food for lunch. The Samaritan woman, taken aback, asked, "How come you, a Jew, are asking me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink?" Jews in those days wouldn't be caught dead talking to Samaritans. Jesus answered, "If you knew the generosity of God and who I am, you would be asking me for a drink, and I would give you fresh, living water." The woman said, "Sir, you don't even have a bucket to draw with, and this well is deep. So how are you going to get this living water? Are you a better man than our ancestor Jacob, who dug this well and drank from it, he and his sons and livestock, and passed it down to us?" Jesus said, "Everyone who drinks this water will get thirsty again and again. Anyone who drinks the water I give will never thirst, not ever. The water I give will be an artesian spring within, gushing fountains of endless life." The woman said, "Sir, give me this water so I won't ever get thirsty, won't ever have to come back to this well again." He said, "Go call your husband and then come back." "I have no husband," she said. "You've had 5 husbands, and the man you're living with now isn't even your husband. You spoke the truth here, sure enough." "Oh, so you're a prophet. Well, tell me this. Our ancestors worshiped God at this mountain, but you Jews insist that Jerusalem is the only place for worship, right? Believe me, woman, the time is coming when you Samaritans will worship the Father neither here at this mountain nor here in Jerusalem. Your worship guessing in the dark. We Jews worship in the clear light of day. God's way of salvation is made available through the Jews. But the time is coming. It has in fact come when you're called with not matter where you go to worship will not matter. God is sheer being itself, spirit. Those who worship God must do it out of their very being, their spirit, their true selves in adoration. The woman said, "I don't know about that. I do know that the Messiah is coming. When the Messiah arrives, we'll get the whole story." "I am the only one," said Jesus. "You don't have to wait any longer or look any further." Just then his disciples came back. They were shocked. They couldn't believe he was talking with that kind of a woman. No one said what they were all thinking, but their faces showed it. The woman took the hint and left. In her confusion, she left her water pot. Back in the village, she told the people, "Come see a man who knew all about the things I did, who knows me inside and out. Do you think this could be the Messiah?" And they went out to see for themselves.
Many of us are familiar with the Psalm 42. At least the beginning verse says, "As a deer longs for a cool stream, so longs My soul longs for you, O God. And this idea of water and thirst is a powerful metaphor precisely because we have all had that experience of being thirsty. It's the body's yearning to live. Just like hunger pangs or gasping for air, there is a spirit or a force within us that longs to live. And so just like our bodies long for water, our souls thirst for God, longing for God. It's built into us. Even if you don't believe in God or use the right words or concepts, there's something within that longs and is thirsty for truth and beauty and love and wisdom. That's all the hunger for God and the thirst for God. This image of water and thirst is universal. It's because it's personal to every human being. And I know we all have our stories of powerful moments of thirst. I can think of 2 times when I probably would have killed for water. One was, well, that's a little exaggeration, but I was desperate for water. At age 17 or thereabouts, late August football practices, which, by the way, I was terrible at, but I wouldn't trade the experience because it pushed me to levels I would probably never have gone physically. But in the late afternoon heat of summer, we would be worked so hard and I'd be dying by the time a water break would come around. And the other vivid recollection I have of overwhelming thirst was when I was in intensive care unit 8 years ago, recovering from heart surgery complications. And even though I was being hydrated through IV, so I guess I wasn't dying of thirst, but the sensation for thirst was just overwhelming. It was all consuming. It was sheer torture, and I would have paid any price for a glass of water at that point. In the story of the Samaritan woman at the well, we are hearing a story, of course, about thirst, but I put thirst in quotes because the conversation begins, of course, with the physical need for water. It evolves quickly, as we just heard, into a much deeper conversation about spiritual truth, thirst. I could say that the actual conversation itself, the actual dynamics of this conversation that Jesus has with the woman is a kind of thirst quenching, just within the dynamics themselves. I say that as I consider this: what does every human soul long for? What is the universal thirst underlying every human, regardless of culture, status, or various identities? Well, I'm going to suggest a few. Let's start with, I think it's the need to belong. We all have that need. It's the need to be respected. It's the need to feel heard and seen. And it's the need for meaning and relevance. Within this conversation that we just read in the scriptures, Jesus and the Samaritan woman are touching on some of those basic needs, it seems to me. With that in mind, let's parse out this conversation, and I want to keep the operative word transcendent or transcend in mind. So keep that word, transcend, in mind. Because in this conversation, Jesus transcends racism. Although there's that little part there where there's a little bit of, well, we Jews are in the light and you Samaritans aren't. But nonetheless, the woman and Jesus are separated by racial identity. Jesus doesn't belong to her Samaritan tribe, nor does Jesus, nor she to Jesus's Judean tribe. They both were born into cultures just like us, shaped and formed by historical forces bigger than themselves. And we could go into the interesting history that led to the cultural division, but for the sake of time, I'll keep it brief. Samaritans and Jews hadn't been united together as one people since basically King Solomon's rule 1,000 years earlier. The modern analogy to the schism between Samaritans and Jews strikes me similar parallels perhaps with Palestinians and Israelis. It's that kind of animosity is my sense. In the case of the Samaritans and Jews, it was after the invasion of the Assyrian Empire in 722 BC, and then later the Babylonians came and conquered the southern tribe in 586, and the resulting cross-cultural intermarriages and developments of new traditions that occurred through this upheaval results in two groups estranged from one another. On a primitive level, yes, belonging to certain cultural groups is what we human beings gravitate to. It's part of our survival. It's within our genetics. These are my people. They protect me. They care for me. They keep me safe. They give me the sense of belonging I crave. We are united. And furthermore, we are distinct and superior to those others. And it doesn't take much for this human need to belong to a particular culture to morph into racial animosity and tribal warfare, in-group versus out-group, combined with competition for land and resources equals war. And here Jesus is transcending this tribal animus. He enters into hostile foreign territory and he asks for water from his enemy. That's significant. Jesus transcends sexism. The word was not applied in those days, but that's what we would see it. The woman and Jesus are separated by sexually prescribed norms. Women don't engage with men on topics of cultural relevance. Women don't challenge men, and this woman does both. That's even more amazing to me. Jesus seems okay with this. Not only is Jesus having a conversation with this woman, she's engaging him with some pushback. This, we could say, is a sign of great respect, to engage in honest and respectful dialogue. Rabbi Jacob Neusner, in his book, A Rabbi Talks with Jesus, explains that for a rabbi to argue and dialogue with others is a sign of respect. He goes on to say, that is, serious dialogue, is my form of respect, the only compliment I crave from others, the only serious tribute I pay to the people I take seriously, and therefore I respect and even love. Jesus is working, I suppose you could say, within this great rabbinic tradition of verbal give and take. That's significant. And then finally, Jesus transcends moral barriers. The woman, it seems, is an outcast based on some presumable moral failures regarding who she is partnered up with. I say presumable because the text doesn't really say what the circumstances were that she should have 5 husbands, with the current one she's living with not even being her husband. The story doesn't tell us what led to this situation, but it appears that Jesus doesn't seem to care. He just states it as fact. You don't have 1 husband, but rather you have 5. Okay? It's objective truth, nothing more, withholding moral judgment. And by revealing what he knows about this woman's situation, Jesus gets her attention. I see you are a prophet. We don't know if she said it sarcastically or astoundingly. That's another beautiful thing about the Bible, is the Bible doesn't give us cues to how people say things. But anyway, she affirms him as a prophet. Now she's not just talking to an ordinary person. This man knows things about her that no ordinary stranger would know, and he doesn't seem to care about judgment. Again, significant. So under these three externally imposed barriers of race, sex, and morality, Jesus simply blows them away. Because ultimately, in the big scheme of things, none of those things matter. In fact, they get in the way. They have to be transcended, get beyond. Some of you may or may not have noticed I have a little white button that I sometimes have on my jacket, and it says, basically, transcend the nonsense. And what we as followers of Jesus are called to do is transcend the nonsense. Transcend the cultural and personal barriers that separate us. If for no other reason than because such estrangement, at least from my perspective, is tiresome and damaging to the spirit. Yes, it's fine. We need to see race. We need to notice sexual differences. That's okay. And yes, it's fine to acknowledge the moral failings that in the past have created grief. But this is who we are, and they make up the rich fabric of our human existence. And sadly, if we're not careful, we can make those things into barriers to the deeper human connections of spirit. Where I get really excited about this story is when Jesus says to the woman, in essence, God isn't worshipped in any one temple or mountain. Rather, a time is coming and has now come when the true worship of God will be in spirit and truth. For they are the kind of worshipers God seeks. God is spirit, and those who worship God must worship in spirit and truth. That's the message to me of transcendence. Though we gather in this building, and we can and should be a physical space for gathering and sending out, and gathering again and sending out, we know this building is not where God dwells. We carry God within the temple of our heart. And I know it sounds a bit cliche, but I'm discovering that some of the cliches, when tempered with time and experience, often point to deeper mystical truth. I used to think the Catholic iconography of Jesus bearing his wounded heart to the world was a kind of cheesy. But I don't think that so much anymore. The heart center is where the Spirit speaks and where the Spirit resides. Within each and every human, there is a holy temple of the Spirit of God within. You bear the temple of God. You bear the image of God. The holy sanctuary dwells within each and every precious human being. And so now, sometimes, if you're out and about, if you share this awareness, when you pass that stranger or bump around in a crowd, don't forget that each and every human being carries within them the holy sanctuary of the living God. Shortly, we are going to celebrate communion. It's a symbolic and physical partaking of the bread and the cup. In some traditions, you must be properly initiated into the Jesus Club to come to the table. But I don't think such exclusion reflects the spirit of the story we've just spent the last few minutes considering. I think the church is to be a place of welcome and breaking barriers, and this table of communion is to be a symbolic reflection of that. People have different understandings about communion, what it means, and the significance of it, and it evolves over time, and I'm of the mind that come to the table anyway and let it speak to you in the way that the Spirit chooses. God does not expect us to have it all figured out. God does not expect us to be perfect. The only requirement would be that we come with a sincere, humble, and receptive heart, and let the Spirit do the rest. That's my reflection for this morning. of our every ill. And it may be new to many of you, but here we go.